guys, welcome to another podcast episode. So today I want to focus on mental health and think about mental health specifically in schools and why it's so important that we pay attention to mental health and well-being. So let's just have a quick think about mental health and well-being and how it's changed and become so important even in the last 5 years. So I think there are 3 key areas that have changed for children in their childhood that impact us at school. The first one is that numbers of childhood trauma are rising. So I know I talk about this a lot, but honestly, the amount of children that come into education now with an emotional need that is because of adverse experiences at home, trauma, difficulties, or just struggles are massive compared to what they were. Now, when I first started this business, that was about 8 years ago, there was probably I would say 1 or 2 children in every class that the teacher would say, yeah, these particular children are really struggling emotionally. And those children would be referred for play therapy. However, now, 8 years nearly down the line, that number has raised significantly and it's actually been quite scary to watch. So now if you asked a teacher in an average class of 30 children, how many children are struggling emotionally, what you'll get back is 10, 15. And I think the stats actually say that there's around 20 children in every class of 30 that are struggling with some sort of adverse experience. Now, just to clarify, that might be things like having really low confidence and self-esteem because mum and dad broke up, or it might be that they're in a really large family of siblings and things are just quite difficult, it's not a lot of money, or it might be that that child's experienced abuse and is now in the care system, or maybe the family is known to social services for domestic violence or something along those lines, or drug use. There are lots of different things that we can consider an adverse experience for children and traumatic. Now, when I talk about trauma, the majority of the time I'm referring to children who are dealing with ongoing trauma in their lives. So it is those children who are experiencing domestic violence or who live in a house that's quite abusive, or who struggle because the family struggles. The family has a history of struggling, and so the child is brought up in that environment where maybe there is a lot of stealing, maybe there is a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol misuse, and things are just quite difficult and quite scary for those children. So childhood trauma covers quite a lot of different things. For me, obviously, as I said in my first podcast episode, it was experiencing a dad who was heavily involved with alcohol and had depression. And again, depression is something that lots and lots of people are dealing with, and that's going to have an impact on children. And sometimes you might not think things are difficult for that child at home, but actually they are. Mum and dad might just have a really low tolerance for stress. So there's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of threats, there's lots and lots and lots of things. And that has an impact emotionally for the children. It impacts their friendships, it impacts their ability to make friends, to feel part of a secure unit where they're loved. It makes them quite angry, quite frustrated inside, quite anxious sometimes. It will affect their behaviour at school. So you might have children who are low level kind of hyperactivity in school. So for example, tapping on the table, it might be that they're shaking their leg quite a lot. Maybe they're just constantly doing things that are not massive, but just low level things all the time. And you know that if you turn around, it's going to be that child again. Or there's children who just cannot really function in a school setting, and that is nothing to do with their ability to function in a school setting. It's because of the circumstances they're dealing with that overrides their ability to really think about or focus on anything else. So, you'll have those children who run away, the children who get into arguments really quickly or refuse to do things, children who seem to be triggered. And we've talked about triggers in our other podcast episodes, but that are triggered all of the time over things that seem really small. And all of these things get in the way of their learning. And essentially, the way that the education system is built up, the reason for the children being there is to help them to learn. And obviously, at the moment, that learning, those outcomes are assessed through tests, they're assessed through academic kind of tick box exercises, and those levels for these particular children are going to be a lot lower than maybe they could have been if they hadn't have been dealing with additional trauma, additional emotional stress. And we know that children who come into school very stressed or have high levels of stress are going to be battling with lots of different things emotionally that is going to get in the way of their academic achievements. But it's also going to get in the way of their ability to learn, actually in their brain cognitively, to retain information, to remember information. And we have talked about this in previous episodes. So for that in itself is a huge barrier to learning for these children. Imagine not being able to have healthy relationships, falling out with people all the time, feeling unwanted, feeling unloved, being frustrated that no one listens to you, feeling like you're always the one in trouble. And then when you do try and do your work, it's overwhelming, it's hard, you feel like you can't do it because you just don't have those resiliences, you don't have that internal strength, and you don't have the positive mindset either. Everything just seems to be more and more and more and more stress. And so you have children who are just bundled up in that stress that struggle to see any way out. And that is having a huge impact on childhood and also our education system. The other thing that I think is really, really prevalent right now is social media and technology. And we did talk about this in a previous episode again, but I'm just going to build on that right now. So if you think about the world's changed massively, even in just the last 5 years, and technology is changing every single day. So what we think we know today is going to be totally different in a year's time. And we as adults have experienced a lesser version of that. So when we were growing up, we did play outside, we did speak to our friends and socially interact a lot more because that was the only way to do it. If we went home, we were at home. You either went out and saw your friends physically on the street or you didn't communicate with them. As I was growing up, I was kind of early phases when I was probably in year 10 or maybe year 9, year 10, 11 of high school. That's when they brought in the computers. And I remember we all got hooked on MSN Messenger, which is a bit like WhatsApp but for computers. So I would spend all evening sat on that, staring at a wheeled-in computer in my bedroom on dial-up and just spent hours talking to my friends on MSN chat, and it was literally just stupid conversations, pictures, whatever else we could find at that time. That is literally WhatsApp today. But that was when I was a lot older. I'd had all that early kind of foundation stuff that was focused on relationship building, friendship building, listening skills, eye contact, social contact, figuring out, okay, well, if I behave this way, people are going to respond negatively to that. So I need to adapt that and change that and respond this way instead. Or how do I manage this situation? And trial and error. And also just playing, imaginative play, getting outside. We would play games that you would consider really young now, but I remember when I was in high school, we would make little nests on the floor with the grass that had been mowed up by the caretaker, and we would make little nests for birds, and we would do dances, we would do singing. And I know that children do that at the minute at school in the playground, but they're not doing that as much at home. And lots of children now just opt for technology. And unfortunately, for many vulnerable families, the easiest way to parent is just to allow the children on the technology because it keeps them quiet, it keeps them busy. And so for that very stressed out parent who's already struggling, it's lessening that stress because they don't have to do as much intense parenting. And it is extremely draining to be a parent, to constantly be that person that the children need, to be emotionally available and listen and aware and attentive. That's really tiring. If you're already dealing with stress, you don't know when the next paycheck is, or you just want to get that next drink, or someone's being volatile to you and you're trying to survive, then parenting becomes really far down on the rung of responsibility. So it's much easier to just give a child a piece of technology, an iPad, the Xbox, the TV, a phone, because it keeps them quiet and stress levels are low. But what happens as a result of that is that children are not having the same experiences that they would have had otherwise. So obviously for very vulnerable children, they would have had a difficult experience with their families in either scenario, but there's less eye contact, there's less conversation, there's less communication, and just children in general. How many children just opt for iPads and opt for computer screens and just spend hours on them? And actually what that's doing is it's decreasing their imagination, it's decreasing their ability to problem solve, it's not getting them out in the fresh air, getting them physical, it's not getting them immersed in friendships and relationships and figuring out new ways of playing, all of those things that are so enriching for childhood that actually they're not getting. And that is a real red flag. And I think it's something we maybe overlooked when we think about the impact on education, on the school experience. Because I know that if you're using technology quite a lot, your stress levels are going to be higher. Now, you might be speaking to your friends, you might be playing on games, you might feel like you are busy and you're enjoying yourself, but actually internally it's extremely stressful for our bodies and our minds. So the screen is draining, the relentlessness of being online all of the time and the kind of the concentration that takes from you. It's like all up in your mind, and that is quite draining and quite difficult to maintain. And if you're doing that for hours and hours and hours, then emotionally it's going to take the energy from you. It's also going to make you more stressed out, because when you're on technology, you might have, let's say you're on social media, let's say you're on a phone, you're on social media, things are flashing on the screen all the time. You know, if you've got, you're scrolling up and down and it's different things, it might be a video, it might be an image, it might be somebody's comments, and everything's fast paced, you're sort of scrolling up, swiping across. If you're on a game, so children who play games on like apps on phones or tablets, there's often quite a lot of adverts flipping in and out, they've got to maneuver things. And as much as a lot of that is great skills technology-wise, it's very, very draining, very, very tiring, and it makes our stress levels higher. So all of those feelings that we get, those sort of happy hormones and endorphins, they only come as a really quick fix when you get on technology, and then they go when you want it again. So you're constantly going back to technology over and over again, but it's not maintaining a level of happiness. It's actually draining us. Now, what does that mean when children come into our classrooms? Well, there's quite a few things, and one of the main ones I think is just the attention span. You know, you get children coming into your classroom, and if they've been using technology from a really young age, then their attention span is really short because they've been programmed to expect quick things to come up on their screen. You know, a quick picture, a quick image, a quick kind of click of like button, etc., etc. But again, we've got to revisit, what is that doing for our children? Then we're asking them to sit and, you know, look at a piece of paper and analyze that piece of paper and take their time with that piece of paper and maybe do some writing on it or maybe do an activity on it. But actually the very act of sitting there and concentrating is not something that they've learned to do, which they might have done had they been trying to make a house out of sticks, because it takes time, it takes a mental effort to kind of sit there and problem solve, and so they're able to learn to stick with something. But you know what I mean? Whereas when they're on an iPad or a game, they just flick off if they're not interested or if it's not working or whatever. So there are lots and lots of things with social media and technology. The act of liking something on technology and clicking a like button is very different to actually appreciating something in real life. You really appreciate something, you take your time with that thing, you learn from that thing, you absorb that thing. But when you click a like button, it's just simply an act and then you move on. And sometimes you probably can't really remember what that content even was because it was so quick and so fleeting. So all of that is having a big impact on our kids' attention spans, on their own hyperactivity, on their ability to be still, be present, take their time, read, learn, absorb, problem solve, and also on their levels of anxiety. I don't know about you, but when you've been on your phone for a long time, I definitely don't feel settled. I feel more anxious, especially if the content you're watching is making you more anxious, if the content is negative, like we discussed in our previous episode a few weeks ago. So technology and childhood trauma are huge influences on our children, and just those two things alone are increasing a whole range of emotional problems or emotional barriers before you even start to teach that really do need to be addressed. And then the final thing, if we think about right now, you know, at the time of recording this podcast episode, we're in the middle of the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. So there's added layers of things going on for children that are external, that maybe have nothing to do with family, nothing to do with childhood trauma of the home, but actually are externally stressful. So if we think about the Manchester bombings that happened a few years ago, that was very stressful for a lot of our children and young people in school. And even if they hadn't been there, they experienced it through social media, through the videos they were watching, through the news, and through the stories they were hearing from friends. It's really similar now. So we've got this pandemic, it's on every news channel, it's on every TV advert that you can see, it's on every social media channel, everyone's WhatsApp, and it's physically reminding us as well when we go into shops and we've got to wear masks and we've got to do all of these other things. And it's impacting education in lots of ways. And I'm sure you know all those details a hell of a lot more than me, because it's you sending bubbles home, it's you having to follow the guidance. But emotionally, that is having a huge impact on our children and our young people. And again, impacting mental health, impacting well-being. So it's almost like a threefold hit at the moment, because with this pandemic, you've got children coming in who maybe you sent home 2 weeks ago. Well, if you sent them home 2 weeks ago, as we've said before, they're probably going to be feeling quite anxious about the next time you're going to send them home. Or if a few bubbles have gone down in school, maybe they're worried that they'll be next. I know I have a really close friend she has 2 young girls. And between them, those girls have been home 5 times since September. And at the time of recording this, we're in November. So that's not a very long time actually in school if they've had to have a 2-week break each time. It's actually crazy. So that's going to have its own impact. What if the kids just don't want to go to school anymore? What if they give up? What if those really vulnerable kids just think, do you know what, I'm not doing it? Because they need to keep themselves safe. They're sick of being disappointed in all other areas of their life, maybe with carers, maybe they've been placed in foster care, maybe the parents gave up on them, maybe they were removed from their parents, maybe a parent left the home, and now school's telling them they can't go back in again. So as much as we're doing everything we can, actually the impact of this pandemic is having a severe impact on the mental health and well-being of our children and young people. Now, a lot of children and young people are doing amazingly well. They're turning up for school, they're happy, they're flourishing, they're still learning, but there's an undercurrent there that we cannot ignore. So those 3 things are having a huge impact on the mental health and well-being of our children. Now, mental health is really, really important, and it's one of the key things that we need to be teaching our kids. Now, I know that the government recently made it mandatory to do PHSE lessons, which is fantastic, and we've got the relationships and sex education stuff coming now, which is great. But what we need to do is to actually really jump on that. That's a brilliant thing, but it should have been in the pipeline years ago. It should have been mandatory from the beginning of time, because it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. You cannot expect a child to be able to engage in English and maths if they're not able to problem solve and reflect and reason and have empathy and concern and understand their own emotions and have self-regulation skills, because that's going to create all these things, all these barriers we've just talked about are going to create this bubble around this child, which means they can't access learning anyway. So actually the 2 come hand in hand. Now, if we think about children out there in the real world, one of our biggest skill sets that we need, even if you think about right now with the pandemic, is all about how we manage our mental health. A lot of people are still sat at home. I'm finding it increasingly difficult to keep a really positive mindset about work, because I speak to a computer now. I don't speak to real people. I don't know how many people are listening to this podcast. Well, I do. I can look at the stats, but I don't know the impact it's having on your lives. I can't have a conversation with you and unpick this with you. I can't come into your school and help support your children directly or speak to your staff and empower them and inspire them. I just have to rely on my courses and my content getting out there. And part of that is fantastic because I can see the impact when people leave feedback. But part of it is really disheartening for me because I'm a people person. I want to be out there talking to you guys. I want to be creating relationships. I want to know who you are. Who are you that's listening to this podcast? That for me is really difficult. And what I need to be able to do at this period of time, it's been 8 months in this period of time now since March, 9 months. I need to be able to really keep a check on my mental health so that I can continue to move forward through this year, regardless of what is thrown at me. And that is true of you, and it's true of every child in the education system as well. And that isn't just because of the pandemic. That's for everything. Our children need to learn how to be resilient, how to problem solve when things are tricky. What happens if there's a crisis or a barrier, or if things are really hard? All those vulnerable children who are going to be living with families who are dealing with stress probably forever. The child, I believe, can change, and I believe we can mold that child to have a different outcome, but it's much more difficult to change the families, to change the lifestyle of the family, because it's more entrenched, it's more inset. And they've built their life around that. They've got friends, they've got family, they've got different ways that they narrate their life, which is entrenched in this way of being. And it's very difficult to pull yourself out of that and change years and years and years and years of thought and processing and beliefs. But we can do that with our children in school through teaching. So the PHSE stuff comes in so much here, because this is where we can do that. And we need to be able to teach our kids, this is how you manage stress. This is what stress is, and this is what it looks like if you don't manage it. And these behaviours you're experiencing doesn't mean you're naughty, doesn't mean you're a bad child. That is normal, healthy responses to stress, normal, healthy responses to a very difficult experience, and this is how you manage it. And that is hand-holding. And just like you would with your own children, you're guiding them through how to cope, how to manage, and how to recognise those things so that they can be in charge of them for themselves when they get older. And that is really where the magic is, because if you mould children into really being able to deal with difficult experiences and really being able to be aware of what their processes are, what their responses are, their reactions are, and have very key messages around, you are not your trauma, you don't have to repeat the same patterns. If something's really difficult, you can't change the difficulty, but you can change how you respond. All of these life lessons, they're not just taglines on Pinterest. They're actual thought processes we need to download into our children so they can live their lives by them. And as much as I'm a huge, huge fan, and I really am, of positive quotes on the wall, it goes a little bit deeper than that, where we've got to start changing the mindset. And that's changing the blueprint of a child's brain. So if you've got a 5-year-old in your class, fab, because that child is younger and you can start a lot of this work. But if you've got a 10-year-old in your class, then this is super important, because these things that they need to start to learn about managing their mental health and well-being have to happen now. Because if they don't happen now, that child is going to go off to high school and really, really struggle. Because let me tell you, high school is only a tiny proportion of the actual lessons themselves. There's a hell of a lot more lessons around high school than just what you're being taught in the classroom. Things like changing to different teachers, through different teachers, different classes, being your own person, navigating your own timetable, having a bit more freedom, independence, figuring out who you want to be around, who you want to be friends with, how to challenge yourself even if everybody else isn't, or how to stay focused on what you want to do when other people might not agree. There is so much that comes with that. Never mind thrown into the mix all the hormones and periods and all the other stuff that might be starting around that time, facial hair, voice breaking, all of that. So there's a lot going on. If we can create some of those foundations in primary school, then we're doing a pretty damn amazing job for these kids. And I think that's what obviously my passion is, but I think that's something that we really need to focus on. And if we can get that bit right, then we're going to set these kids up to really be able to manage their lives and hopefully to really be active, engaged, excited, inspired learners, because they've got time and space in their minds to be able to focus on learning. So let's just pull this back for a minute and think about two things really. First of all, are they taught that? I think at the minute, no. I think a lot of children in a lot of households aren't being taught these early life lessons. And that is literally just through the way parents are speaking to the kids, how they're solving problems together as a family, and by modelling things. How are the family responding to the stress? How are the family responding to the difficulties that they're experiencing? I think the sad truth is that a lot of adults, they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with their mental health. So if they haven't, how can they pass that down to the children? Now, it seems to me that if we can't expect and rely on parents to do that, there has to be a system in place where we can teach the children, and the most natural place for that to be is in school. So let's have a think about what mental health actually is. So I like to think about mental health as if it was on a ladder, because I feel like mental health and well-being really link together. So we think about our mental health. That's how healthy our mind is. So it's how healthy we keep our mind. Just like we keep our body physically healthy by walking, drinking lots of water, going to sleep, eating well, we also have to think about taking care of our mind. And that is what mental health is about. Now, there are two trains of thoughts. You can have mental health where you think about, in your mind, you think about sort of doctors and science and medication, or you can have mental health where you think about mindset, thought processes, perception. And that's where I tend to put a lot of my work and energy. I think there's so much we can do to take care of our mental health and our mindset that's then going to help our overarching mental health than we actually give ourselves credit for. So if we think about mental health, that's around looking at what kind of thoughts are you thinking? What kind of beliefs do you have? What kind of perceptions do you have? What is it that you're allowing to be in your mind? That's your mental health. A lot of it is around thought processes. And actually, we can start to see that our mental health is becomes more negative when we don't look after our well-being. And that's why I think about it as like a ladder. So well-being would be the very first few steps on that ladder. And then as you walk up a little bit, you hit your mental health. So if you can take care of your well-being each day, day to day, week to week, that's going to have a direct impact on your overarching mental health. And that's because our daily stresses and things that are tricky in our lives, our challenges, kind of happen over a period of time. And we've got to be taking our mental health and well-being into consideration. And by looking at our well-being, that's going to really help. So, for example, we've been in this pandemic now for about 8 or 9 months. So it started in March, and you might have thrown yourself into your work. You might have really kind of worked and done loads of lesson plans. You might have really thrown yourself into it, worked really late at night, and you might be at the point now where you look back and you go, God, it's 9 months and I'm still working really hard. I'm still throwing myself into it. And you realise you haven't really done much to look after your well-being. You haven't slept, you've not been eating very well, you've not been ringing your friends and family and talking to them as much as maybe you were before, and you're not doing anything for you. And actually that's your day-to-day care, your well-being that you've neglected over this period of time. And it builds up really quickly. And if you let that happen for very long, it can start to really affect your mental health, because then it has an impact on the way you think, on the way you feel, and on your perceptions about things that are happening around you. And it means that you are less able to manage challenges, you're less able to manage difficulties and stresses, because you've not got a great handle on your mental health. So you are more snappy, you're more irritable, you're more tired, you just think, what's the point? Nothing's good, nothing's great, I feel rubbish all the time, I've got low energy. And that is where you can start to see, actually, this really starts to affect my mental health. And that can happen to people throughout their lives. So if you think about families that are already quite vulnerable, maybe they've not been looking after their mental health for a very long time. Maybe no one taught them how to look after their mental health. And they're struggling with that because it's 6 years that they've been carrying around something that was really hard for them, and they've still not let that go. They've still not processed that and allowed themselves to really think about how that's impacting their thoughts or their feelings. And so that's got a real massive impact on their mental health, because their well-being and their ability to take care of their well-being hasn't been great. So this is something that we need to apply to our lives. And our well-being is our feeling of wellness, our sense of happiness, our sense of feeling good. And that is really important, that we take care of our well-being day to day. So are we managing those small stresses? Are we taking more time for a bath, or to ring people, or to have DVD nights once a week, or whatever it might be that makes you feel better? If you do, then you're more likely to be able to manage your mental health, because you're taking care of those small steps on that ladder first, so the overarching mental health issue is a lot better and you can manage problems better. And if you test this out even just for a week, have a whole week where you still do your lesson plans, you still work really hard at work, but you give yourself 3 nights off where each night you have a bath, you have some candles on and you read, you'll feel a hell of a lot better the following week, and you'll be able to manage challenges more. You'll be less stressed out, probably snap a little bit less. You'll probably be in a position where you can cope with those stresses because you've given yourself that time with your wellbeing strategies. So this is super important for us to think about if we're thinking about school, okay? Because at school, we can't really expect children to learn academically if they're not taking care of their well-being and if there's impacts on their mental health. So if we think about what we've said before, maybe a lot of these kids are dealing with difficulties at home. Maybe things are pretty stressful. Maybe they are feeling quite anxious. If no one's teaching them about that, how can they manage that? And if we already know that when we're not taking care of our mental health, we get more stressed, more tired, and more negative in our mindset, then that's going to be a barrier to the children learning, isn't it? And actually what we need to do, what we want to do, is to really encourage the children to understand how to take care of their well-being and therefore their mental health. And that's going to really help them be in a better position to learn. Okay, so one of the biggest things that we can do is to help them with this. So I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of families, a lot of adults in families at the moment, especially now vulnerable families, probably haven't been taught how to look after their own mental health. And what you find is that people who haven't looked after their mental health well as a child or been taught these skills around understanding what's going on in their mind, listening to their thoughts, and then being able to do something about that and actually take some action, which is taking care of your mental health. If they haven't been taught those lessons, then they've probably got years and years and years of stress built up, and that's really impacting how they feel and how they think. And we can see this in statistics. So if you look at the science around this, there's lots of stats that say that children who've grown up in trauma or children who've grown up with difficult experiences in their lives are more likely to drop out of education. They're more likely to get involved in things like alcoholism and drugs and inappropriate relationships from probably quite an early age, and things that are basically avoidance strategies. They're more likely to get involved in those. So they're probably going to avoid their feelings. They're probably going to swallow down those feelings and drink more or take drugs to cover it up, or maybe they'll get in a gambling habit because that helps them to cope in the here and now, but actually doesn't help to make them feel any happier or their sense of wellness any better. It's just a way to cope. And what we want to be able to do is say, well, do you know what? It's likely that a lot of our parents and carers haven't been able to develop those strategies. And so we can't expect them to teach the children. Because if you've never been taught that, you can't teach that to somebody else. So therefore, it comes down to us in education. And I think that's really fair. You know, the PHSE stuff has come into play now, which is amazing. But actually, this is something we should have been teaching for years. And it's the missing piece of the puzzle if we truly want to help the children flourish in the real world and be the best version of themselves, because they can't learn anything else until they learn about how to manage that. Things will be stressful. There are challenges. There are times where things are hard and there are times where things are sad. How do you manage that? What do you think when things are tricky? Do you think my life is terrible, everything happens to me? Or do you think, do you know what, I can get up, I can manage this, life doesn't happen to me, I'm able to be in charge of how I respond? Or, you know, there's so many different things that you can do that help to start to change the thought process of these children, which in turn is going to help them with their mental health. So how can we actually do that in education? The first way I would say is to teach. So how you teach them is often just by what you say, how you speak to the children. So in your day-to-day language, are you talking to the children about their feelings? Are you highlighting when they might be struggling with their well-being? Because if you're not, that's a really simple, easy way to start to tackle this problem. So, you know, instead of saying to Sarah, you've been so angry today, none of your friends want to play with you, you've been a nightmare, this is going to end up making you fall out with your friends, so you don't have any friends. Or do you say, Sarah, you're feeling really, really frustrated at the moment. You're quite stressed out, things are quite hard, you haven't slept very well, and you're a little bit more irritable. That's why you're falling out with your friends. Which one is going to help her with her well-being and her mental health? The one where she gets more insight. Giving her some insight into how she feels is really going to help her to start to understand how to take care of her well-being and realise it's not a thing that's bad about her, it's not something that's wrong with her, it's just her coping strategies that aren't great. And then you might extend that and go, do you know what, at break time, why don't you go and do some meditation for 5 minutes? Or why don't you go and have some time where you just go in the music room for a little bit? Or something that you've built into your practices as a school to help her start to cope with those feelings. Same with, let's call him Abdul. Same with Abdul. So let's say that you go into Abdul and he's struggling with his work and he's really, really finding it hard. Are you going in saying, Abdul, you're just feeling a little bit anxious at the minute. The bubble has broken down twice this week. You know, you're probably feeling a bit unsure about whether you'll be here next week and you've missed out on lots of learning. It's okay that you can't do this maths right now. Let's figure it out together. Or it's all right if you're feeling a bit anxious about it. rather than, come on, we need to do this work, Abdul. Come on, concentrate please, because obviously he can't concentrate. There's something blocking that concentration, which is probably about his well-being and his mental health. He's probably got negative thoughts going on at the minute. That's what we need to tackle. So it's really about how you speak, and you can do this throughout loads and loads of different ways in your day. In fact, every time you speak to a child, that's a fantastic opportunity to guide them through what is going on for them. So there's always a learning experience in every conversation, every action, and everything that you do with the kids. There really, really is. You just have to find the lesson. So it might be that you see that the class is just feeling really, really low, and you say to everyone, guys, everyone's just feeling a little bit low at the minute. There's really low energy in this room. I think maybe we need to go outside and do some exercise, because exercise helps our bodies and gets our mindset right and gets our feeling of wellness up, and that's great for our well-being. So you're constantly speaking to the children. It might be that, you do go over to Jack, and Jack has been arguing quite a lot that week, and you go, Jack, you're really struggling this week, aren't you, with your anger? You know what? That's probably because you're quite stressed. There's probably quite a lot going on. Here are some of the things that we can do to help you. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes of journaling time. Go and do some journaling time and just let some of those feelings come out of you. You can draw whatever you want. You can write whatever you want. Just find a way to get it out. This is a great way to get it out. Instead of, Jack, you have been a nightmare this week. You fought with so-and-so. You've been on timeout. Go and sit in Miss Jackson's class. Or you need to go home. Or go and have timeout. Or whatever your behaviour management strategies might be. So the two things are really different. It's about giving them the awareness. What is going on for me? Why am I feeling this way? And what do I do about it? That is about wellbeing and mental health. Very, very much so. Even more than just doing a lesson on mental health. That is really helpful. Every day, small things that you speak to the children about all the time. The next thing I would say is actual lessons. So, there is a place for lessons, very, very much so. And I think we have to jump on this bandwagon and say, do you know what? PHSE lessons are a brilliant opportunity to really inset a lot of these messages. So a lot of mental health for me is around our mindset and our thought process, like I said before. So PHSE is a brilliant way to start to introduce new ways of thinking and introduce concepts about the world. So obviously we're looking at friendships, we're looking at challenges, problem solving, we're looking at being a good citizen, helping people, giving back to people, understanding differences. There's so much within the PHSE sex and relationship education guidelines that we can really harness and help also with mental health and well-being. And that's the beauty and the power of it. So have a little look at your PHSE guidelines, have a little look at your curriculum. Are you including lessons about success and failure? If you fail at things, does that mean you're a failure? Or does that mean that you just need to learn from what didn't work and find what does? Or are you doing friendship stuff? Are you explaining what is a good friend and how maybe you're not being a great friend and what you can do to adjust that? And why friendship's so important for our life? What does it give us? What does it do to help us? Because if they understand that, maybe in a few years' time in high school, they're not going to go and make friends with somebody who's a bit of a bully and get involved in that because they feel like they need to be wanted. Because you've taught them about what real relationships are about. And that might break a cycle. It might break a lifetime cycle that maybe some of their parents or their family is still getting involved in that they can break free from. Similarly, it might be that the child's able to say, no, I want to stay in and I want to work. I want to do my studies, because you've entrenched in them this mindset of working and understanding that, you can be whatever you want to be, but you need to work hard at it and not give up and just keep going. So they say no to that party and drinking because actually they know that they've got a path, they've got something they want to do. And if we can put those messages into our children when they're young, it's going to stick. And it's going to change the way they think. And that is a much better time to do it than high school, when things are already challenging, they're already struggling with changes, they're already struggling with lots of other things. Primary school is the perfect place. So think about your PHSE lessons and really home in on those, and don't just do them once a week. Do them as regularly as you possibly can, because that is such an important part of learning. And like I say, the more that you teach them about the PHSE side of things, the social, the emotional, the more likely it is they're going to want to learn. The more likely it is that they can apply themselves to learning, because you're giving them those strategies and those skills within those lessons. And then the final thing would be modelling it. So what are you doing in your day-to-day that's modelling taking care of your well-being? Because if we take care of our well-being together as a whole, that's going to teach them life lessons. I can bet that a lot of people who don't have daily practices to keep themselves happy and to look after their mindset are probably going to be struggling with mental health. So teach the children that now. And it might be simple things like music in the morning. Now, if you're still not doing music in the morning and we're on podcast episode 8, you need to go back and re-listen to all the podcast episodes because it's such a powerful tool, and I just want you to give it a try. Have a little think about it. In the morning, put some relaxing music on YouTube, let the children come in quietly and sit and just take some time and say to them, right guys, we're going to have 5 minutes of calming time this morning before we start our day, because things might be stressful or tiring or difficult at home, or there's loads going on in our lives. Let's just take some time, calm our minds, calm our bodies, and that's going to get us ready to learn. And the more we're ready to learn and the calmer we feel, the more we're going to be able to be excited about learning. So you're constantly speaking to the children about their well-being and strategies to help them with that. Like I say, you might offer the children a chance to work and use journaling. You might look at your behaviour management strategies and find time where you can put in there and say, do you know what, I actually understand that these children aren't truly struggling with behaviour. It's not about them being bad. They're not making these choices. They need guidance. They need help. So how and where in our behaviour management strategy can we put in time for them to really regulate and teach them life skills? Maybe we can teach them to do some journaling when they feel stressed, or we can teach them to listen to some music or have 10 minutes of closing their eyes and just doing deep breathing. And those skills are modelling skills that are going to be able to teach the children resilience skills in the future, where they can really start to take care of their mental health. And that is super simple stuff that you can do. And the more you model it, the better. You know, you might say, guys, you're going to go outside for a break now. And that is really important for you because it gets your mind ready for the next part of the day. You know, you'll always be really tired and you might not take it in. And it's really good for our well-being to get some fresh air. So you all go outside and play. I'm going to go and have a nice calming cup of tea and we'll come back in 10 minutes. And just verbalising what you're doing and why is really going to help them to start to get those cogs turning about why mental health and well-being is so important, what they can do about it, and also where they might be struggling with their own. So there's so much that you can do, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put some freebies in here to help you. So I will put in a free lesson plan around wellbeing and mental health that you can do with your class. And I'll also put in some quick tips about how to model to the children. So some daily practices that you can do. I'm going to take that from my wellbeing curriculum and give them to you guys for free. So please use them. They're super simple, but they're having a big impact in lots of schools. And then finally, I just want to say that there's so much that you can do as a teacher. And you might be thinking, but my school doesn't really do any of this. That's totally fine. You're in charge of how you speak to the kids. You're in charge of how you respond to the kids. You're in charge of what you do as a response to your own mental health and well-being to show them, and also which lessons you actually teach. So there's loads that you can do in this academic year to really get those messages into these children and start to change their brain and their ability to take care of their mental health. Okay, and the last thing that I want to say to you is super exciting. So I am going to be launching a therapeutic teacher membership really soon. So this membership will be for individual teachers to join. It'll be around £20 a month, and in that membership you will have access to a whole curriculum full of lessons that will help with all the PHSE stuff and more. It will also have a course that you can do that's like 6 modules that helps you become more therapeutic and really underpins so much more of what I talk about in this podcast, so that you can upskill yourself and empower yourself to really tackle mental health and wellbeing in your school and really vulnerable children as well. And then there's going to be loads of masterclasses. So we're going to get guests in and they're going to be doing brilliant lessons on things like why sleep is so important and what you can do to help children with autism or ADHD and just really upskill yourself. So it's an amazing opportunity to invest in yourself and in your profession and really become the best teacher that you can be, especially if you've got an passion of working with children who are more vulnerable or just in mental health and wellbeing as it is. And there'll be so much more time and opportunity to connect with me as well. We're going to be doing lots of lives in Facebook, we're going to be doing loads of things, and I would absolutely love to have you on board. So watch out for that and click the link below to sign up to be on the membership waiting list. Okay guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and I'll see you again in the next episode. Bye.